Supreme Admiral Vex Thor stood in the command center of his massive warship, staring at the glowing blue reports floating in front of him. His 4 yellow eyes moved back and forth as he read about the strange new species they had found. The creatures called themselves humans and they lived on the 3rd planet around a small yellow star. "Tell me more about these humans," Vex Thor said to his intelligence officer. His voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. Why should the mighty Zephyrian collective care about such primitive beings? Intelligence Officer Kektar stepped forward, his silver skin gleaming under the ship's lights. "Sir, they are very unusual. Most species we have conquered either fight alone or have a hive mind that controls them. But humans are different. They work together even though each one thinks for itself. They will die to save other humans they have never even met." Vex Thor made a sound like laughter, but it was not friendly. "That sounds like weakness to me. A species that throws away their lives for strangers cannot be very smart." "Perhaps, sir. But our spies report something else. When humans are threatened, they become more dangerous, not less. They seem to believe that some things are more important than staying alive." Far away, on a small human trading ship called the UES Harmony, Commander Hyun-woo Kim was having his own concerns. He stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the alien visitors through the security cameras. The Zephyrians were tall and thin, with gray skin and too many arms. They had come to the human trading post 3 days ago, claiming they wanted to learn about humanity. But something felt wrong. "Captain Park," Hyun-woo said to his commanding officer, "I do not trust these aliens. Look how they study our equipment. Look how they ask questions about our military and our planets. They are not here to trade." Captain Minho Park nodded slowly. He was an older man with gray hair and wise eyes. He had been in space for 20 years and had learned to trust his instincts. "I agree. They treat us like we are animals in a zoo. They think we are too stupid to notice." The Zephyrian visitors moved through the trading station with arrogant confidence. They examined human technology with obvious contempt, making notes on devices that looked far more advanced than anything humans had ever seen. Their leader, a tall creature with silver markings on his face, spoke to the human station commander with barely hidden disgust. "Your species has just learned to travel between stars," the Zephyrian said through his translation device. "How many worlds do you control?" "We have colonies on 12 worlds, the human station commander replied proudly. "We hope to establish peaceful trade with many species." The Zephyrian made notes. "And your military? How many warships do you possess?" "We maintain defensive fleets around our major worlds. We believe in protecting our people, but we prefer peace to war." Back on the Zephyrian command ship, Admiral Vex Thor listened to these reports with growing satisfaction. 12 worlds. Defensive fleets. They speak of peace. He turned to his war council, a group of senior officers who had conquered dozens of species for the collective. "Gentlemen, we have another easy victory ahead of us." The war council chamber was dark and cold, filled with the smell of metal and recycled air. Holographic displays showed maps of human space, with their pathetic 12 worlds scattered across a tiny section of one spiral arm. Compared to the collective's 200 star systems, humanity looked like insects. "Shall we send the standard subjugation fleet?" asked Fleet Commander Zekmar. "Yes. 50,000 ships should be more than enough. These humans have been free for too long. Their ideas about individual worth and democratic cooperation are dangerous. If other species learn that they can resist us, we might face rebellions across our empire." What the Zephyrians did not know was that every human ship in the trading station had been quietly recording everything. While the aliens thought they were dealing with primitive creatures who could not understand advanced technology, human engineers had been working day and night to crack the Zephyrian computer systems. Commander Hyun-woo Kim sat in his small quarters, listening to the translated conversations through his headphones. His hands shook as he heard the aliens planning to attack his homeworld. 50,000 ships. Earth's entire defense fleet had maybe 3,000 vessels, and most of those were small patrol boats. "Captain," he said into his communicator, "we need to send a message to Earth immediately. Code Black Emergency." Within minutes, the fastest human ship in the trading station was racing toward Earth at maximum speed. The captain of that ship, a young woman named Lieutenant So-young Choi, pushed her engines far beyond safe limits. She knew that every minute could mean the difference between Earth receiving a warning and facing total surprise attack. As the Zephyrian fleet prepared to depart, Admiral Vex Thor felt confident about the coming battle. In his long career, he had overseen the conquest of 47 different species. Some had tried to fight. Others had surrendered immediately. All had eventually become slaves of the collective. Humans will be no different, he told his officers. They are weak, divided, and primitive. In a few weeks, their worlds will belong to us, and their people will serve the collective for the rest of their lives. But as the massive Zephyrian war fleet entered hyperspace, heading toward the Sol system, they carried with them a fatal misunderstanding. They thought they were hunting weak prey. They had no idea they were about to encounter a species that viewed freedom as more valuable than life itself. The war that would reshape the galaxy was about to begin. The massive Zephyrian war fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, their 50,000 ships forming perfect battle formations. Admiral Vex Thor stood on his command bridge, expecting to see human ships fleeing in terror or desperately trying to surrender. Instead, his sensors showed something that made no sense. Every human ship in the system was racing toward them at full speed. "Sir," his tactical officer said, his voice uncertain, "the humans are not retreating. All their vessels are moving to attack positions." Vex Thor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. "Let them come. Their primitive weapons cannot even scratch our shields. This will be over in minutes." But something was wrong with the human approach. Their ships were not spreading out in proper battle formations. They were not trying to use cover or defensive positions. They were simply charging straight at the Zephyrian fleet like arrows shot from a bow. "Look at this," said the sensor officer, pointing to his screen. "One of their destroyers is heading directly for our flagship. It is not even trying to aim its weapons." Captain Ji-hoon Lee sat in the command chair of the U.S. Defiance, watching the enormous Zephyrian command ship grow larger on his view screen. His crew of 200 brave men and women sat at their stations, knowing exactly what they were about to do. "All hands," Ji-hoon announced over the ship's communications system. "It has been an honor to serve with you. Tell my wife I love her." He turned to his helmsman. "Full power to engines. Set collision course with their command ship." The young officer at the helm, barely 20 years old, nodded with tears in his eyes. "Yes, sir. Full power." On the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Vex Thor watched in growing horror as the human destroyer accelerated directly toward him. "What are they doing? Why are they not firing their weapons?" "Sir," the tactical officer said, his voice rising with panic, "they are going to ram us." "Impossible. No species would sacrifice an entire ship just to damage one enemy vessel." But the U.S. Defiance struck the Zephyrian flagship at full velocity, its hull crushing against the alien ship's armor. Captain Ji-hoon Lee and his entire crew died instantly, but their sacrifice destroyed the fleet's main communications array and killed 300 Zephyrian officers. All across the battlefield, the same scene played out again and again. Human ships of every size threw themselves at the Zephyrian fleet like guided missiles. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they used their ships as weapons. When their engines failed, they set their reactors to explode and waited for enemy ships to come close. Lieutenant So-young Choi flew her small fighter through the chaos of battle, dodging Zephyrian laser fire and missile explosions. She was one of Earth's best pilots, with reflexes fast enough to dance between enemy shots. But her fuel gauge was dropping toward zero, and her weapons were almost empty. She could have retreated. Her fighter was fast enough to escape back to Earth. But instead, she looked at the picture taped to her control panel, a photo of her 5-year-old daughter playing in their garden back home. "I am sorry, little one," she whispered. "Mommy has to make sure the bad people cannot hurt you." She pushed her engines far past their safety limits, feeling the fighter shake as systems began to overload. Ahead of her, a massive Zephyrian cruiser was firing on a group of human evacuation ships filled with families fleeing Earth. "This is for my daughter," So-young said, and drove her fighter straight into the cruiser's weapon systems. The explosion lit up space like a small sun, and the Zephyrian cruiser spun helplessly as its guns went silent. The evacuation ships escaped, carrying thousands of children to safety. What terrified the Zephyrians most was that it was not just the military ships doing this. Converted cargo vessels, mining ships, even small pleasure craft were ramming their battle fleet. Captain Dong Hyun Nam, who had spent his life hauling supplies between human colonies, loaded his cargo ship with explosives and crashed it into a Zephyrian troop transport. A retired teacher named Professor Mi Young Song took her small research vessel and used it to destroy a Zephyrian communications relay. "They are all insane." Admiral Vex Thor screamed as he watched his fleet's casualty reports climb higher and higher. "No rational species fights like this. They are throwing away their lives for nothing." His science officer, a brilliant strategist who had studied many different species, looked up from his analysis of human communications with something like fear in his eyes. "Sir," he said quietly, "I have been listening to their transmissions. They are not insane. They are not throwing their lives away for nothing. They are making a calculation. What kind of calculation? They believe that by sacrificing themselves now they can save their species later. Each ship that rams us takes out 10 or 20 of our vessels. They are trading their individual lives for the survival of their children. Vexthor stared at the tactical display, watching as his supposedly invincible fleet was torn apart by desperate humans who refused to surrender. Ship after ship disappeared from his screens, destroyed by enemies who treated their own lives as ammunition. But this is impossible, he said. No species can sustain this kind of sacrifice. They will run out of ships, run out of people willing to die. The science officer shook his head. Sir, every human transmission we have intercepted contains the same message. They are not fighting to win this battle. They are fighting to show us that conquering them will cost more than we are willing to pay. They want us to know that every human world we attack will fight exactly like this. As the hours passed, the impossible became reality. The mighty Zephyrian fleet, which had conquered dozens of worlds, was being destroyed by humans who turned themselves into weapons. By the end of the battle, not a single Zephyrian ship remained intact enough to return home. Admiral Vexthor's last transmission, sent just before his flagship exploded, was a desperate warning to his people. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage the humans. They fight like demons. But there was no one left alive to carry that message home. High Command Admiral Zekmar stood in his war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing casualty reports that made no sense. 50,000 Zephyrian ships had entered the Sol system 6 months ago. Not one had returned. Not a single survivor had escaped to tell what happened. This is impossible, he growled, his 3 arms gesturing angrily at the displays. Primitive humans cannot destroy an entire fleet. There must be some mistake. His intelligence officer, a nervous creature with pale blue skin, stepped forward carefully. Sir, we have confirmed the reports. All 50,000 vessels were destroyed. But worse news is spreading through our empire. What could be worse than losing an entire fleet? The subject species are talking, sir. They whisper about the humans who chose death over slavery. Some of our slave worlds are asking dangerous questions. They wonder if they too could resist us. Zekmar felt cold fear creep up his spine. The Zephyrian collective ruled 200 star systems, but most of those worlds were controlled by fear. If the conquered species learned that resistance was possible, the entire empire could collapse. Prepare the second armada, he ordered. 500,000 ships. We will not make the same mistake twice. We stay at maximum range and turn their entire planet into melted glass. No close combat, no boarding actions. We destroy them from a safe distance. Far away in the Sol system, General Hien Suyun stood in the command center built deep inside the moon. The room buzzed with activity as hundreds of human officers coordinated the defense of their homeworld. 6 months had passed since the first Zephyrian attack, and humanity had used every day to prepare. General, reported Major Jinwoo Park, looking up from his sensor station, long-range scanners are detecting the enemy fleet. 500,000 ships, just as our spies predicted. Hien Su nodded grimly. He was an old soldier who had fought in 3 different wars, but nothing had prepared him for this. Humanity faced an enemy with technology centuries ahead of their own, commanding a fleet larger than anything humans had ever imagined. Signal all units, he announced. Operation Hornet's Nest begins now. Remember what we learned from the first battle. We cannot match their technology, so we make technology meaningless. The massive Zephyrian armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, their sensors immediately scanning for human ships. Admiral Zekmar expected to find the humans cowering behind their planet's defenses, waiting hopelessly for the end. Instead, his sensors found nothing. Where are they? He demanded. Where are the human ships? His tactical officer studied the sensor readings with confusion. Sir, the system appears to be abandoned. Earth cities show no lights. The orbital stations are powered down. It looks like they evacuated. Zekmar smiled coldly. Good. They finally learned wisdom. Move the fleet closer. We will destroy their empty world and end this embarrassment once and for all. But as the Zephyrian ships moved deeper into the Sol system, they were entering the most carefully planned trap in human history. What looked like empty space was actually filled with hidden weapons and disguised ships. Lieutenant Commander Eun-ji Park sat in the command center of Ceres Station, watching her sensors track the enemy fleet. The massive asteroid had been secretly converted into a fortress over the past 6 months, its surface covered with weapons disguised to look like natural rock formations. Steady, she whispered to her crew as thousands of enemy ships passed through their kill zone. Wait for them to get deeper into the trap. Captain Sung-Ho Kim floated in his stealth frigate among a field of space debris, his ship's hull covered with materials that made it look like a piece of destroyed satellite. His crew of 12 volunteers sat quietly at their stations waiting for the signal. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt, dozens of similar ships waited in perfect silence. Each one was loaded with nuclear mines and piloted by volunteers who knew they would not survive the battle. When Admiral Zekmar's fleet reached the center of the Sol system, the trap was sprung. Now, General Hyen-Soo Yoon commanded from his lunar bunker. Suddenly what had seemed like empty space exploded with weapons fire. Asteroid bases that had looked like natural rocks revealed massive cannons that began firing at the Zephyrian ships. Hidden missile platforms launched thousands of nuclear warheads. Stealth ships dropped their disguises and activated suicide charges that turned them into guided bombs. "We are under attack," screamed the Zephyrian tactical officer. "Weapons fire from everywhere. The asteroids are shooting at us." Captain Sung-Ho Kim watched his target, a massive Zephyrian command ship, move into perfect position. He looked at the picture of his family taped to his control panel, then activated every nuclear mine his ship carried. "Tell my wife I kept my promise," he whispered into his radio as his ship exploded like a small star, taking 12 enemy vessels with it. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever experienced. Every time they destroyed what looked like a human position, two more revealed themselves. Hidden bases built into moons and asteroids poured fire into their formations. Camouflaged ships emerged from behind planets to launch surprise attacks. Lieutenant Commander Eun-ji Park's asteroid fortress held out for 3 days, its massive guns destroying hundreds of enemy ships before the Zephyrians finally managed to crack its defenses. As her station began to break apart, she transmitted a final message to Earth. "Ceres station has fallen, but we took 1,000 of them with us." Admiral Zekmar watched his fleet's strength drain away like water through a broken cup. His ships were being destroyed faster than he could count them, and worst of all, he could not even see most of his enemies. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapon. "Retreat," he finally ordered. "All ships, retreat immediately." Of the 500,000 ships that had entered the Sol system, fewer than 20,000 escaped. Admiral Zekmar stared at his casualty reports in shock. He had lost almost his entire fleet to an enemy that should have been helpless. The humans had proven something terrifying. They could learn, adapt, and fight in ways no other species had ever imagined. News of the Second Fleet's destruction spread through Zephyrian space like wildfire. On the capital world of Zephyria Prime, emergency meetings filled the government buildings as officials tried to understand how 500,000 ships could simply vanish against primitive humans. But the real shock waves were felt on the conquered worlds scattered throughout the collective's empire. On Krelia 7, a mining world that had served the Zephyrians for over 1,000 years, Commander Thekvar stood before his work crew in the deep tunnels beneath the planet's surface. He was a tall, insect-like creature with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the harsh mining lights. "Brothers," he said to the gathered workers, "have you heard the news from the human worlds?" The miners looked at each other nervously. Speaking about the war was forbidden, punishable by death. But Thekvar continued anyway. "The humans destroyed another Zephyrian fleet. 500,000 ships. They fought with mining equipment, cargo vessels, even small pleasure craft. They turned their tools into weapons and their people into warriors." An old miner named Vektar stepped forward. "What does this mean for us?" Thekvar pointed upward, toward the planet's surface where the Zephyrian garrison maintained their control. "It means we have been fools. We have industrial mining lasers that can cut through solid rock. Why have we never used them to cut through Zephyrian ships?" The idea was so simple, so obvious that it took their breath away. For 1,000 years, they had used their powerful mining equipment to serve their masters. It had never occurred to them that the same tools could be used for freedom. 3 days later, the Krelian rebellion began. Mining lasers that had carved tunnels through mountains turned their beams on Zephyrian patrol ships. Industrial excavators became assault vehicles. The Zephyrian garrison, caught completely by surprise, was destroyed within hours. On the ocean world of Vortha, a different kind of revolution was starting. The Vorthans were a peaceful species that lived in underwater cities, providing food and rare minerals to the collective. They had never fought a war in their entire history. But Elder Morten had been listening to the human broadcast that somehow reached even their deepest cities. He gathered the Vorthan councils in the Great Assembly Hall, a beautiful chamber carved from living coral. "The humans have shown us something we never understood," he told the assembled leaders. "They fight not just with soldiers but with everyone. Every human is a warrior when their freedom is threatened. But we are not warriors, protested Counselor Limera. We are farmers and builders. We know nothing of war. Morten's reply echoed through the chamber. Then we will learn. The humans teach us that any tool can be a weapon, any citizen can be a soldier if the cause is just. The Vorthan uprising was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Farmers used their irrigation systems to flood Zephyrian bases. Construction workers turned their building machines into siege engines. Even children helped, using their knowledge of the underwater tunnel systems to guide resistance fighters through secret passages. But the real nightmare for the Zephyrian collective came when small human ships began appearing throughout their space. These were not invasion fleets or military vessels. They were teachers. Captain Eugene Lee commanded one such ship, the Prometheus, a small stealth vessel carrying just 30 crew members. All of them were volunteers who knew they would probably never return home. Their mission was more dangerous than any military assault. They were spreading ideas. This is Captain Lee of the human vessel Prometheus. She broadcast on emergency frequencies that reached dozens of collective worlds. We come not as conquerors but as friends. Every species in this galaxy has the right to choose their own destiny. Her ship's computers transmitted technical specifications for simple weapons, tactical manuals for guerrilla warfare, and most importantly, the story of how humanity had defeated two massive Zephyrian fleets through courage and determination. Freedom is not given, her message continued. It is taken. We are sharing our knowledge because we believe that every intelligent species deserves the chance to be free. Supreme Admiral Kethzon, the newest commander of what remained of the Zephyrian military, stood in his command center watching reports pour in from across the Empire. Red lights blinked on the star map, each one representing a world in rebellion. 87 worlds now in active revolt, reported his intelligence officer. And the number grows every day. Kethzon studied the reports with growing despair. The rebellions were not random uprisings by desperate slaves. They were coordinated, intelligent, and they all used the same tactics the humans had developed. Worse, each rebellion was fought with the same desperate determination that had destroyed his fleets. How many ships do we have tied down fighting these revolts? He asked. Over 2 million vessels, sir. Nearly our entire remaining fleet. And we are losing more ships every day. On her intelligence vessel hidden in an asteroid field, Lieutenant Sumin Han monitored Zephyrian communications with growing satisfaction. Her ship's advanced computers decoded thousands of enemy transmissions every hour, and each message brought better news. The Andromedan sector has fallen completely under rebel control, she reported to Earth Command. The Zephyrians have lost 3 entire fleet groups trying to retake those worlds. The rebels are using our tactics perfectly. Her communications officer looked up from his station. Ma'am, we are receiving reports from human ships throughout collective space. The rebellions are spreading faster than anyone expected. Some worlds are defeating Zephyrian garrisons before we even arrive to help them. Sumin smiled as she watched the galaxy's power balance shift on her tactical displays. The Zephyrian collective had ruled through fear for thousands of years. But humanity had given their victims something more powerful than fear, hope. The idea is spreading, she said quietly. They are not just fighting the collective ships anymore. They are fighting the collective's right to rule them. Across the galaxy, the revolution continued to grow. Species that had been slaves for millennia were learning that freedom was possible. And they were willing to pay any price to achieve it, just as the humans had taught them. The Zephyrian collective was discovering that some ideas, once released, could never be contained. Supreme Admiral Kethzon stood in the center of his command ship, surrounded by holographic displays showing the complete collapse of the Zephyrian collective. Red warning lights covered nearly every star system on the map. Rebellions burned across 80 worlds, and his remaining fleets were scattered thin, trying to hold together an empire that was falling apart. Sir, his chief of staff reported with barely controlled panic, we have lost contact with the outer rim sectors entirely. The rebels have captured our supply bases and are using our own weapons against us. Kethzon closed his 3 eyes and tried to think. In just 2 years, the mighty collective had gone from ruling 200 worlds to barely controlling 50. All because of one small species from an insignificant yellow star. Gather every ship, he ordered. Every vessel that can still fly. We end this now. His officers looked at him with concern. Sir, if we pull all our fleets back, the rebel worlds will be completely free. The rebel worlds are already lost. Kethzon roared. But we can still stop this plague from spreading further. We destroy the humans completely. Every world, every ship, every last one of them. Without their example, the rebellions will eventually fail. Over the next 3 months, Zephyrian ships from across the galaxy gathered at the secret staging area. 2 million vessels assembled into the largest fleet in galactic history. They carried weapons that could crack planets in half and reality-warping technology that could erase entire star systems from existence. "This time we take no chances," Quetzon announced to his commanders. "We stay at maximum range and use our planet-killer weapons. We turn their worlds into dust and move on to the next. No boarding actions, no ground invasions. We simply erase them." The massive armada entered hyperspace heading for the Sol system. But when they arrived at the coordinates where Earth should have been, they found something impossible. Earth was gone. Not destroyed, not conquered, simply gone. In its place hung a massive space fortress larger than anything they had ever seen. The structure was clearly artificial, built from thousands of ships welded together and covered with weapons and defensive systems. "What is that thing?" whispered the fleet science officer. Before anyone could answer, the fortress began broadcasting a message in every language known to the galaxy. The voice was calm, clear, and absolutely determined. Admiral Junicio Ko stood on the command bridge of Haven's Gate, the fortress that had once been Earth's orbital shipyards. Around him, officers from dozens of different species worked side by side with human crews. The Krellian mining expert at the weapons console, the Vorthan engineer monitoring the shields, the reformed Zephyrian defector at the communication station. "This is Admiral Junicio Ko of the Free Species Alliance," he announced. "To the Zephyrian fleet, you have come seeking to destroy humanity. But humanity is no longer just one species on one world. Humanity is an idea. We are everyone who chooses freedom over slavery, courage over fear." The message continued broadcasting as the enormous Zephyrian fleet spread out in battle formation. "You made us your enemy not through our choice but through your actions. You wanted to see what happens when you threaten everything we hold dear. Now you will learn." Quetzon stared at the fortress with growing horror. It was not just the size of the thing, though it was clearly larger than most moons. It was what the structure represented. Somehow, the humans had convinced dozens of other species to join them, to build this massive defensive platform together. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "we are detecting ships moving behind the lunar orbit." What emerged from Luna's shadow was a fleet that defied belief. Thousands upon thousands of ships, but they were not all human designs. Krellian heavy cruisers flew alongside human destroyers. Vorthan stealth fighters moved in formation with human carriers. Ships from 30 different species, all working together as a single massive force. "Impossible," Quetzon breathed. "How did they coordinate so many different species?" Captain Mi-Young Song commanded the human battleship Indomitable, but her crew included volunteers from a dozen worlds. Her weapons officer was a former Zephyrian slave who had learned to fight for freedom. Her engineer was a Krellian who had helped design new weapon systems combining the best technology from multiple species. "All ships," she broadcast to the Allied fleet, "remember what we fight for. Not just our homes but the right of every species in the galaxy to choose their own path." The battle that followed was not really a battle at all. It was a demonstration of what happened when an empire based on fear faced an alliance based on hope. The Zephyrian fleet, despite its massive size and advanced weapons, fought as individual ships following orders from distant commanders. The Allied fleet fought as a single organism, each ship supporting the others, each species contributing their unique strengths to the whole. Lieutenant Taehyun Bae, coordinating fighter squadrons from his command ship, watched Krellian miners use their industrial lasers to cut through Zephyrian armor while Vorthan engineers provided technical support through quantum communication links. Former slaves fought alongside their liberators, using tactics they had learned from human teachers but adapted to their own abilities. "The enemy fleet is breaking apart," reported his tactical officer. "Their formations are collapsing." Supreme Admiral Quetzon watched his final fleet disintegrate under the coordinated assault. But what terrified him most was not the military defeat. It was the realization that his empire had created its own destruction. Every species they had conquered, every world they had enslaved, had learned from the humans that resistance was possible. His last transmission, sent as his command ship exploded around him, was a warning that would never be received. We should have left them alone. We should never have taught them to fight. As the last Zephyrian ship was destroyed, Admiral Junicio Ko stood quietly on his command bridge, watching the debris field that had once been the most powerful fleet in galactic history. "Send word to all free worlds," he ordered. "The war is over. The galaxy belongs to those who choose to be free." The age of the Zephyrian collective was finished. The age of free species working together had begun.